Hey everyone! I've spent the last few weeks building this feature-packed workbench and I am thrilled with the results. In this video, I'm going to put a few finishing touches on it so I can call this project done, for now at least. So stick around as I put on this quick release vise that I picked up from Lee Valley, and then I'm going to also turn this handle for it, and I'm also going to turn some handles for the pins that I'm using to keep the flip-top sections in place. So stick around. I started out by cutting some of the scrap pieces from the flipping tops to the rough dimensions I wanted for the jaw of my vise. Then I glued and clamped them together. After the glue had dried, I trimmed the jaw to its final size and beveled the outside ends, partly for looks, but also to keep the corner from reaching out and grabbing me when I walk around the bench. Here, I pop the snap ring off the back of the vise, then partially disassemble it. If you take a look at the front jaw on this vise, there's this small washer that's up against the faceplate that's bigger diameter than the threaded shaft. So I have to cut just a little bit of a recess to accommodate for this washer to get my jaw to sit flat up against this plate. So now I've got the recess for that washer drilled out, and now I can just drill holes all the way through for the 3 total rods. I'm going to drill the 3 holes oversized by just a little bit so that when I put it into place on the bench, I can fine-tune the positioning of it and get the top just perfectly flush with the top of the bench. And then I will tighten down the screws that actually hold this to the faceplate of the vise. Now I position and bolt down the mounting bracket to the underside of the bench. This was easy because if you remember from part 1 of this build series, I marked and drilled holes for this while I had the top upside down before mounting it permanently to the frame. Then I slide the rods into the holes of my new plywood jaw and see that the faceplate sits flush. Then I can slide this whole assembly into the mounting bracket. Reaching to the back side, it takes just a bit of wiggling to get the threaded rod to line up with the quick release bolt. Then I can reinstall the plate on the back end of the rods and secure it with the snap ring. Now, using a straight edge, I fine-tune the position of the jaw with the top of the bench, then tighten down the vise to hold the jaw in place. Three bolts through the faceplate of the vise lock it in place for good. A little bit of sanding to knock down the sharp corners and the vise is ready to go. Now it just needs a handle. This is a log of black walnut I found in my firewood pile and figured it would make good knobs for the ends of my handle. I started out by cutting it into 3 equal-sized pieces on my bandsaw. Then I mounted each piece in the lathe and cut away the bark and sapwood. You can see it takes me just about as long to adjust the tool rest and the speed of the lathe as it does to make the cuts on the workpiece. I think it's time for a new lathe. I use a moisture meter on the rough blanks because they seem very green while turning off the sapwood. The actual number doesn't really matter here, it just tells me that the wood is way too wet. So I toss the pieces into my toaster oven for a few hours to dry them out. I use a bolt to hold the door open just a crack so the moisture cooking out of the wood has a place to escape. Switching my attention to the rod portion of the handle, I drill and tap one end after cutting a block of wood to size. I'm threading the handle because I want it to be removable. I don't foresee an actual need for this, but I'd rather have the option and not need it than wish I had it somewhere down the line. After turning the rod round, I cut down one end until it is roughly the diameter of the hole in the vise. Then I proceed to trimming the whole thing down to match that first cut. After getting the rod as uniform as I can by eye, I then use sandpaper glued to a flat block to make it perfect. Then I finish up by sanding with the grain to take out any scratches. The knob pieces were in the oven for a few hours at this point, so it's time to check them with the moisture meter again. 8 to 9% is about as dry as I've ever seen anything in my shop, so this is good enough. Using a Forstner bit the same diameter as the rod I turned a minute ago, I drilled a recess into one end of the knob pieces. Then I drilled and tapped a hole at the center of this recess. These holes will allow me to mount the pieces on the lathe, as well as to the hardware I'll be using once they're finished. I ended up making a total of 4 of these knobs. I did a prototype one first to make sure my plan was going to work. Then I made 3 more with the chunks I got out of the piece of firewood. And of course, I only filmed myself turning the ugliest one of the bunch. With this many knobs, I was able to be selective and put the ones that turned out the best onto the vise handle. Then I mixed up a batch of epoxy and started installing the hardware. For the permanently fixed end of the handle, I could have just as easily used wood glue, but since I already had the epoxy going, I just used it here too. I taped this end up before gluing it to save myself a bunch of sanding from any spillout that might occur. I used boiled linseed oil as a finish, wiping it on thick and letting it soak in, then wiping off the excess.
Does that look pretty?
You think it does?
Yeah.
Good, I think so. The 2 extra knobs are going to be the handles for the pins in my flipping stations. I epoxied the longest bolts I could find into them, then marked and cut them down to length. Now I can remove the old bolts that were serving as temporary pins and install my fancy new ones that are much easier to use and look much better. Finally, I can slide the handle into the vise and tighten down the removable knob. I think I'm in love with this vise. It looks great, it's incredibly strong, and the quick release feature makes it work faster than any other vise I've ever used. Well, that about wraps up this workbench build. It is fully functional and working just exactly the way I want it to. There's a few more little details that I'm going to take care of later on down the road. I still want to put in the drawer storage underneath it that I planned out, but as you can see behind me, I've got kind of a lot of stuff in the works right now, so I need to get caught up on that before I get to this. So anyway, thanks for coming along with me through this whole build process. And if you haven't already, please give me a like on this video and hit subscribe so that you can get all the future stuff that I've got coming up. So thanks a lot, and we'll see you next time.